Good morning, everybody. Corey Hughes Bloody History. So, we're going to continue on today with the Richard Sprague Garrison Bud Fensterwall conference document from 68. It's really been fascinating. It's kind of like a mishmash of Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Let me think. Is there anything I need to talk about before we get started? So, the audiobook is finished. It's up on Buy Me a Coffee right now for a warning from history. I have one or two small edits to make, and then I'll be uploading it to Amazon, Audible, whatever the fuck. But it's available right now at buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook, and when you buy the audiobook, you get my notes and you get the PDF of the book itself. So that's what's going on. What else is happening? If you're in the Denver area, I'll be speaking at the Liberty on the Rocks meetup on July 16th. It's a Wednesday, I believe. So definitely come on out to that. It's very rare I get to do live presentations like with an audience, so that'll be pretty cool. I'm working hard on my Lee Harvey Oswald in Black and White Volume 1 book. I'm 56 pages into it. It's going to be between 200 and 225 pages is kind of what I've concluded, and it's based on a number of factors. It's going to be an 8.5 by 11 full-size book, right? With it's black and white. It's all going to be documents, photographs, and all that stuff, and me explaining what they are and their significance. So it's going to be really cool. It's going to be really cool. I've been talking about doing it for like 6 months, but finally it's becoming reality. I'm not going to do any pre-sales or anything. I don't even know if I'll be able to do a hardcover book because the specs on a hardcover are like a quarter of an inch different from the specs on the softcover. And so I am not about to redo this entire thing just to make a hardcover. So it might simply be just a softcover, full-size book. Unfortunately, because I was really hoping to do like signed hardcover editions and stuff, but I don't know. I'll look into other ways that I can get that done without having to redo the entire thing. But that's what's on the agenda. And so I think we're ready to just pick up from where we left off with this document. I was going to do this on the last show, but I just ended up fucking rambling for a half an hour. Let me see where to begin. So they're talking about James Earl Ray and some of the people they know who've been investigating the case and whatnot. Let me just pick up from right here. You know, they make that out of it's so unusual. I don't remember the FBI ever having bank people as witnesses to overt acts. Garrison says, the best reply ever given to that was when somebody said to Mark Lane at the close of a talk, "My God, the kind of people you're talking about, this wild cast of characters to be involved in the assassination of a president." And Mark Lane said, "Well, I agree with you. It should have been Albert Schweitzer, but he just wasn't involved," and everybody laughs. Now we go ahead with London. Well, through two researchers, actually one redacted at Queen's University in Kingston, who's been working on the Ray, the King assassination problem, and various identities of Ray. He sent all the photos of Galt, Ray, and the sketches over to London to Peter Donnet. He published Juan Houston's book, and he asked Donnet if he would take these down to the landlady or whoever was staying at the Pax Hotel, Mrs. Thomas. So here's a report on his visit with her. She said he introduced himself as a writer doing research and asked her if she would mind looking at some pictures. I showed her the pictures of Frenchie. She immediately said without any question that he was not the man who stayed with her. I then showed her the photograph that appeared in the press with Galt and Ray. By this time, I had won her confidence, and she asked me inside. She explained she never recognized any of the photographs that appeared in the press or on television or the ones showed to her. Snade, the man who stayed with her, was totally different. Her description of him was as follows: height 5'11" to 6'1", weight very lightly built and slender, long face, long and narrow with weight, very lightly built and slender, and then long straight nose, very suntanned, brown hair with tight curls in it. But sort of a crew cut. She thinks his eyes were dark blue and they appeared to have no pupils. And he also had on dark glasses, so it would be pretty hard to tell. What was that about the eyes again? They were dark blue and appeared to have no pupils. That reminds me of a statement we got, quite obviously a sincere statement, just to relate to that one, of a woman who was in Dealey Plaza and a man went by her with a gun. She said, I remember him because of his unusual eyes. He had what we used to call milk eyes. The next thing you know, she hears the shooting, and that's the end of that. Except that a separate witness later on, coming to see us from Dallas, is followed all the way from Dallas by a man with what he described as milk eyes. And I never heard of them before. Could that be eyes with no pupils? Could be. My impression of them is that they are extremely light in color, very light powdery blue. Would that conceivably explain why the pupils don't come out in photographs like this? They have to be put in. The initial photograph, the pupils were not in there. I thought he was dead when I first saw the photo. Yeah, that's probably it. I think the person right there has got eyes definitely closed, dead, or sleeping or something. You don't normally sleep in that sort of a uniform. So that's the other picture of the guy over there, the one on the top right. See his eyes? So I'm not sure who they're talking about exactly. But if you'll recall, the photograph of the short tramp in Dealey Plaza, the one that I've used to show the similarities to Vincent Calderon Jr., the eyes were clearly tampered with. Like they're looking in weird directions and stuff. Like I don't understand why. But it just struck me as kind of interesting. They're talking about this person's eyes, and then you have that picture of the tramp, who is Frenchie, who is one of the people they're talking about, whose eyes were definitely tampered with in the tramp photos. Interesting. What did she mean by no pupils? Did she elaborate on that? Later on, she tells about it looked like he was taking drugs. His clothes, he was not well dressed. His shirt was dirty when he arrived. She thought he slept in his clothes and he wore sunglasses. She feels sure that he wore ordinary glasses underneath and sunglasses on top of ordinary glasses. She thought he was short-sighted and he gave the impression of shabbiness. His age was thought to be 33 to 35, over 30, but not over 40. His accent was sort of Canadian. She thought he was a German Canadian and thought he was going on to Germany to see his relatives. Now, just to digress, I've thought about what my fiancée Gloria thought about as I was reading this. She said, that's Thomas Becket. Long, narrow nose, suntan, and brown hair. He's short. Maybe she means Thomas Beckham. He's short. He's very short and not slender. How short is he? 5'6" or 5'7". But there's no reason to count too much on her description because she's running a secret hotel for somebody that has an unlisted number and doesn't even have a hotel on the outside. The Pax? Yeah, none of the cab drivers ever heard of it, and nobody in the neighborhood knows it's there. It's got to be a safe house. Where'd you find out all that? That came out right after. The London papers were unable to understand where this hotel came from. Nobody knew a hotel was there. In other words, my point is, I think you have to take her description with a grain of salt because she's running a safe house for somebody. But if she was involved, she certainly wouldn't give out a description entirely different from the guy they wanted to be pegged with. Yeah, if she wants to put you off on some false track, maybe you'd spend 6 months tracking that down. She had a feeling there was a mystery about this guy from the beginning. At first, she thought he was drunk, but as she could smell no drink, she decided he was heavily drugged. Of course, Donna, you've got to take into account here his personality and beliefs. I don't know him from Adam, except he published Houston's book. She found a syringe in his room after he left, and she was convinced that he was mentally severely ill. Uh-oh, there you go. She noticed that he watched her, and she thought he was planning to bring in a girl. They seemed to play a game of cat and mouse for 3 days. He almost spent all the time in his room. He went out to buy food and brought it back and ate it in his room. It's the knockout punch, income tax and mental institutions. Sprague says, he kept his door locked and ordered her to leave his breakfast outside where he could pick it up. He complained continually of violent headaches and kept asking for aspirins. She had the impression that half the time he didn't seem to know where he was, as though he were completely dazed. When he arrived on her doorstep, he was accompanied by another man. They had both apparently tried to get into another hotel further up the road, but had failed, but the other guy didn't stay at the Pax. Within 25 minutes of his arrival, an American woman, probably in her 30s. Question is, how does she know her age over the phone? An American woman rang him up, and she'd gone out, but no message was left. The following day, he had 2 phone calls from BEA, the British European Airlines. After that, the next day, Another American man rang up. She went up to his room and knocked but couldn't get a reply. Wait a minute, if they ever went to another hotel and couldn't get in first, how did the American woman know he was staying there? Boxley says, I was thinking that. The guy who accompanied him to the door stoop had the telephone number. Either that or he called her up. She went up to Snade's room, couldn't get a reply. The caller didn't leave a message. Snade's door was locked. On the final day, she knocked on the door at 9:30 in the morning and told him he had to vacate by 11. He replied that he would stay in bed until then. Only a minute or two later, she looked out into the street and saw him getting into a taxi. He had paid in advance and he never returned. And he was the only guest there, and it has no hotel sign in front. It's a phony story. Yeah, of course, there's no other guest there. They don't have a hotel sign in front. The cab drivers don't even know it's there. Nobody in London knows it's there except this escapee from Missouri State Penitentiary finds his way. It must be on a road rather than a street, the way this is described. It's on an underground railroad. Why? Well, he said he went down the road. That's London Street. Unlisted phone. He was the only occupant. There is no sign in front. The British newspapers were very curious about the sudden appearance of a hotel here, and one British reporter questioned stores in the neighborhood and asked if they knew anything about a hotel being there, and they said they never heard of it before. So this is something more for a hotel and something more than a motel and something less than a hotel. He left an enormous number of American newspapers in his room and 2 paperback novels. One was called something like The Assassin of Tangiers. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And the other had a similar title. Just like Oswald had something by Huey Long, didn't he? Yeah. And he also had a book on espionage school for spies. He had that? That's what the Dallas Times-Herald said on December 4th. They ran a story saying that he had, and then it's redacted, Bernard Hutton's School for Spies. That's the title. I don't know who wrote it. School for Spies, Dr. No, and several books on the conservative philosophy. And a copy of 1984. I can't read this because they jumbled it together. I asked her if she thought he was the kind of person who could have coolly planned and carried out the killing, and she replied, he couldn't have murdered my cat. He was totally incapable of planning anything. You only had to say boo to him and he would fall over. I asked her whether she thought him capable of holding a rifle with a steady hand, and she said, what she said was something else. She didn't know about that, but she was certain he'd been on drugs for some considerable time. That's an interesting thought if it's true. Sprague says, the only photograph which Mrs. Thomas felt could have been of Snade was the one in the Observer cutting. I don't know which this is because it was in the London paper. I marked the cutting before I sent it to Burnaby. It was the only one I could match with any of the ones I've seen in the American papers, but Mrs. Thomas explained that if this were Snade, it was a photo taken when he was a lot younger, say in his late teens. It didn't look much like him now. The other photos were quite definitely not of the man who stayed with her, and the Memphis picture, the one in the straitjacket. She couldn't be definite since she couldn't see his face in the picture, but it didn't look like him. On that picture, that was taken by the sheriff in the Memphis jail. The UPI sent it out, but they didn't take it? No, they weren't allowed. The sheriff claims he brought in his own photographer, claims he had this picture taken of him and hands it out to all the newspaper reporters. The next morning, it was taken at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he handed it out at 9 a.m. No one's taken this guy's picture since. Oh, a long time ago, no one was allowed to take his picture in London, and no one was allowed to take his picture. And then Boxley cuts him off. Wasn't he shown on television in the dark? He was not. There were sketches of him, Bill. No photographs of this guy, and boy, I've been following this closely. Has ever been taken since. Sounds vaguely like Oswald. Poor guy's becoming mentally deranged. Sprague says all the pictures we have of the guy are prior to Toronto. Actually, they could put anybody on trial then. That is it. Isn't that interesting? So how do we know the guy in Memphis jail isn't somebody that they just picked up? In fact, I think it is. Well, what does that say? What does he say at his trial? Sprague says, well, look, he only has appeared at one hearing so far. He did not appear at the last hearing, and his lawyer was quoted last week on the radio in New York as saying, my client is becoming mentally unbalanced, and I don't think he's going to be able to stand trial. Deteriorating fast. That's right. So that solves the Martin Luther King killing then. This is the newest technique. Somebody will be put away somewhere. I mean, you can't use injected cancer cells every time. That's hilarious. It's probably a reference to Jack Ruby, who actually was diagnosed with cancer in the 1950s, long before the assassination. Gee whiz, they are really moving fast on that one, aren't they? This guy is never going to be seen again by anybody, believe me, because it isn't Ray or Galt or anybody else. It is somebody they've planted there. His lawyer is the guy who defended Bolo Carter, and his lawyer is extremely right-wing. That, I think, is the kind of thing that you can consider as much as distracts as anything else. I happen to recall a news item on the front page which it was too gratuitous. It was given to the Associated Press, and it was by the head of the National States Rights Party. I think I said that when this man gets back, we will provide funds for a lawyer or anything he needs. But the point is that there are lots of uses to which you can put an organization like that. And one of them is to point away from the government when people start getting curious about things. Now, Haynes claims, of course, a Republican story at least, that he received a letter from Ray asking if Haynes would represent him. How the hell would Ray, this little fellow that can't even get out of his sandals, know anything about Arthur Haynes? Boxley says that's what the Justice Department told him the day they saw him after his arrest, and then denied ever having seen him. Let me tell you what I did. I wrote a letter to Arthur Haynes. First, I called his office and I couldn't get him. Talked to his secretary. I said I had some information which I thought would be very valuable to him in preparing his case. I'm sure he's real interested in it. Well, I was bound and determined if I was going to smoke out whether this guy was a member of the company or not, Okay, so I said, what will I do with it? And she said, send it to him at the address. I got the address and I sent him a whole package, almost everything I've just told you except this last part in London, which I didn't know then. All the pictures and everything, including Frenchie's, and the comparison and all the stuff about the two vehicles. And I said, if you are interested in knowing the name of this guy who probably did shoot Martin Luther King, call me or write to see me. Now, wouldn't you, if you think he's an honest lawyer, be a little curious? Defense lawyers would normally be interested in that. Yeah, I haven't heard a word from him. That was 5 weeks ago. Well, his client's deteriorating fast, and everybody laughs. This man is about to lose a client. He's still looking for a bulb snatcher to turn that light off in the jail. I think this guy is as much of a plant as Garrison says. Sure, do you think they're going to let Joe Smith American come up and go and talk to him? They're not going to let you get near the guy. Boxley says, who's the guy in the second in the Justice Department that just happened to be in London? The son of Fred Vinson Jr. Bill's got a good point on that. You want to make the point about Vinson? He's a crook. Oh, is he? I saw him on television. I saw Vincent on television say he just seen Galt, Snade. Maybe it was Galt, maybe Snade, because I've been off on this other case. 24 hours later, they're beginning to issue denials in Washington that any member of the Justice Department has even spoken. You were definitely past 1984 when they got through passing that bill. Garrison says, but notice what happens when there's any inquiry into the truth, into the facts. Something happens to it. For example, Los Angeles immediately formed a committee of a number of citizens to look into the death of Robert Kennedy. Formed immediately, and something's happened to it. It's gone. Do you know who any of them were? It was announced in the paper, their names, but I'm sure that by now there is some good explanation. Bet within 24 hours, they were probably informed that it would interfere with the government's investigation. Same as the Texas explanation. Don't want to interfere with the government. In Texas, Wagner Carr was getting set, and he was even writing the Chief Justice saying we have to go ahead with ours because there will be questions and so forth, but they stopped him. The Chief Justice said that they would not get one report from the federal government if they went ahead. He was just as blunt as that. Fensterwald says he'd gotten his orders by then. Garrison says he'd gotten his orders. Anyway, within 24 hours, as I recall it, after the killing of Senator Kennedy, President Johnson, deeply concerned about the assassination, said that there would be a federal committee to inquire into this violence in the streets that afflicted the nation. Well, I sent you the clipping. 2 days ago, I opened the paper and I find the RFK committee is not going to look into any facts connected with the RFK slaying. It's going to take up Chicago. You mean that there's a subcommittee of the overall committee? No, this is a committee, the Eisenhower Committee, and the announcement was made by the vice chairman of the committee. I think a man named Cobbler, and he informed the press that there would be no inquiry at all into the facts of the RFK slaying, although because it would influence the case, it didn't say. It just said that they would be talking to psychiatrists and professors and just make the general inquiry, but nothing specific. That way, they probably won't find out anything with that kind of an approach. It's more honest than what the Warren Commission did. Yeah, I guess you're right, but the impression you get immediately, within 24 hours, here the president had selected Milton Eisenhower and other objective men to look into this whole thing. And as the months fade and the men become so remote in people's minds, it's as if it never existed. Then they announced there won't be any questioning about the RFK assassination. Meanwhile, the district attorney is obviously approaching it on the basis of a lone assassin because it's easy to get a conviction. The control that they have in Memphis and LA is astonishing, but I think it's likely that's why those two places were selected. Don't you think so, Bill? There are certain cities where they have more control. Dallas, LA, you couldn't do it in Miami. Holloman and Haynes are both former FBI agents. Holloman, the public safety director in Memphis, Peter Pitchers, the sheriff of LA, the district attorney of LA, and the district attorney. Younger are both ex-FBI agents. I think there's an ex-agent operation in this thing from Bannister right on through. There's that ex-agent at the Riley Coffee Company, Vice President William R. Monahan, explaining how they had to let Oswald go, blah, blah, blah. Wade is an ex-agent. Henry Wade? Of course, he gave them a little problem for a while until he got the message. He got it. He got it real quick. But the first 24 or 48 hours, he mentioned about he was with Wagner Carr when he brought up Oswald working for the FBI, but then he got the message. But he was loving the tube time and all the hutzpah at the time. I guess you're right. He didn't hear much from him later on, did we? Whatever happened to our old friend George Butler? Is he still around? That's Bill Boxley's old pal. Had about 7 conferences with him. He couldn't be content with just the conferences, though. He had to keep a bug up my ass over at the hotel. George Butler was in charge of the transfer, but they changed it for the Warren Commission to Sergeant Hill. Ooh, that's interesting. So George Butler was the head of the police union in Dallas at the time. I don't remember if he was an active officer. He might have been, but he was the head of the police union, and he was Jack Ruby's oldest friend in Dallas, the first, right? So my interpretation of events is that, and you got to remember, Jack Ruby was seen inside the basement on an elevator, like at 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 hours or so before Oswald gets shot, right? So. And then when people talked to George Butler, he was all freaked out that day and kind of evaded talking about what happened. And so the way I see it, George Butler let Jack Ruby in the basement early that morning. He'd been there the whole morning. He didn't leave to go get the money orders. That was Samuel Ruby who got the money orders. And so that's what happened there. And so they're talking to George Butler, and George Butler was in charge. That's fascinating because it is attributed to Sergeant Hill. I bet he got a whole bunch of other information, but Butler was really in charge of it. We put the bug on Hill and that other guy, Dean. Their language is that he was in charge of giving the all clear. Did you run across Marianne Ramus in Dallas? No, but Bill had run across a Felix Ramus in Bolivia. No, this guy is Ramus, R-A-M-U-S. He's a baseball player, and his wife apparently had some inside information on the assassination. And he was helpfully led to George Butler, to whom he gave all of the information, and that was the end of that. Boxley says, was he a baseball player in the old AAA association? I'll tell you where that leads to. That leads to a doorman named Tommy Bittercheck, or something like that at the carousel. You know who I saw, that stripper, you know the guy I saw, the male I saw with that stripper in Dallas. We thought it might be Tommy Cox that they were talking about. It wasn't. It was Tommy Bittercheck. Guys in the research chat, if you can pull everything on Tommy Bittercheck. Is that Tommy who lived with Ruby in the summer of 63? Right, he lived with Ruby. He was a baseball player from Minneapolis in the old AAA. See, this is interesting because I'm thinking of Tommy Rowe, who was in the Hardy shoe store with the whole Texas Theater incident, right? I wonder if they're talking about the same person or somebody different. Right, he lived with Ruby. He was a baseball player from Minneapolis in the old AAA. Senator was not living with Ruby in the summer of 63. They just came up with him real late. It was a man named Tommy Bittercheck. Damn, so Tommy Bittercheck was living with Ruby and not George Senator. That's fucking fascinating. Yeah, guys, pull everything on Tommy Bittercheck, and let's confirm that it's not the same as Tommy Rowe. It's interesting the way these former agent guys show up, isn't it? Boxley says, here's an interesting letter in the volume, Bill. You might have already seen or passed over it. I'm given the citation on that Ferrie or whatever the letter was regarding Oswald's correspondence with Strom Thurmond in the Marine Corps. Milwaukee, Wisconsin letter from Oswald, Marine Corps buddy. He has a buddy who was in the same 8-man squad with him for a period of a year or more, and he followed him from the West Coast, went with him to Jacksonville, and says he went to Memphis. That wasn't an 8-man team. That was a 6-man team. But of course, the record doesn't show that. He redacted. But Oswald was running around with 2 volumes under his arms. One was a brown leatherette type book with Old English script in the title, and the other was about 250 pages. Where are you getting this information? This was out of that letter. What's the reference to that? Yeah, I know exactly what book he's talking about. I remember reading about that. But he went to see him there. Yeah, I saw him on television saying that he saw him by satellite. Later, he said he didn't actually see him. If it would help his career, Fred Vinson would be glad to shoot his mother. Well, he was the first person to talk to him, and then the approach was, in other words, there was an immediate follow-up by the Department of Justice. Went over and talked to the man, somehow realized there were negative implications in that, so it was undone. It didn't happen. It connected a government witness. Bill, you're an ex-FBI expert. Tell me how they are going to win this case when none of their witnesses will identify the guy. Yes, but they've already turned around, I've told you. First, he said to the press he couldn't identify the guy. He only got a glimpse of his face. But if you're a really good defense attorney, boy, you could blow the thing up. But they don't have to worry about this guy. It's in the bag. They own the doctors. They own the lawyers. Which is to say it's completely rigged, including the defense attorney and the whole thing. Look, we don't know that they brought back the same guy they had in London. And if they want him to be found sane, they have doctors they put through the medical school who will testify he's insane. And the man they're testifying insane may be a man who has never left the state, and that will be the end of the case. There's a damn good possibility that Frenchie was involved in both. Frenchie, he's talking about Vincent Calderon Jr. I hope he is, because when you will be happy about the whole thing, the whole ending, because if he's not in it, you're just going to be upset either way. They do have control of the situation, though. That seems apparent. What it amounts to is that we went through 1984 so fast we don't even know when we hit it. Don't you think that New Year's Day 1985 came along and they passed the crime bill this year? Commission's exhibit. Bureau wasn't interested in it. They took a statement. And the other bill was a 100-page blue cover book, but he doesn't know what the title of that book was. Who doesn't? The guy writing the letter. The Marine buddy, do you mean? It's not a letter, actually. It's an interview by the Bureau on June 24th, 64. These are the only kind of things, Bill, that you get the truth on in the Warren Commission, because they are remote enough that the agents at the operating level don't know the meaning. Yeah, there you go. I've been saying that for fucking ever. The people releasing the documents do not understand what the fuck they're releasing. Let me reread this sentence. Things are only kinds of things, Bill. Or these are the only kinds of things, Bill, that you get the truth on in the Warren Commission, because they are remote enough that the agents at the operating level don't know the meaning. Correct. Boxley says it doesn't fit into anything that they've already built, so they just discard it. I'm sure a lot of other stuff got screwed through the screening that they didn't really want to. Well, look at Dr. McClellan. This is volume 23, 797, right? It talks about Oswald writing a number of senators, and that one that he could remember Oswald wrote most frequently was Senator Thurmond, and they spell it Thurman. I'm sure Thurman enjoyed corresponding with an avowed Marxist. Well, NSRP, National States Rights Party, probably had its origin in that Dixiecrat. Boxley says, I think the Thurman operation might possibly be the ones that contacted Oswald on the coast and encouraged his learning Russian and going to Russia. Thurman is connected with who's the House member from South Carolina. Rivers would have tremendous influence over defense industries, wouldn't he? You have an operation probably which ties into the defense complex pretty good, doesn't it, bud? Sure does. I think the town in South Carolina where Rivers is from is about 80% of the people are employed by the defense industries. Bill, you ever heard of a man by the name of John Hurt? No, I don't think so. It doesn't ring a bell. John Hurt's the cutout up in North Carolina. Do you connect the city of North Carolina in any way with the company? Connected with the case, where the reporter, Seth Cantner, has the notes of a North Carolina preacher. Gave the police information about Oswald's gun. Do you remember that? A North Carolina preacher. I can't personally connect it with the company. That must have come up after I left. Well, I keep coming across what Jim thinks is a plant, which may well be. There's a 90% chance it is. I certainly thought so to begin with. But there's a story that came out of Dallas originally, then out of Springfield, Missouri, which I just sort of stumbled across. It couldn't have been planted on me. I know because no one in God's green earth would have known I'd ever heard it. There was 2 telephone operators in the switchboard on the night of the 23rd. One was named Sweeney, who lives in Dallas. The other was a woman named Troon, who now lives in Springfield, Missouri, but who lived in Dallas at the time. Sweeney had the duty and Troon was taking over for the night watch, and she came in a little early, and Sweeney explained to her that there had been some federal agents there, and Oswald was to make a call, and the federal agents would come in the back room and listen. All standard procedure. The federal agents did come in, and shortly thereafter, a call lit up on the board, and Mrs. Sweeney took the call, and the call was to a Mr. John Hurt in Raleigh, North Carolina. But surprisingly enough, Mrs. Sweeney did not try to put the call through, waited about a minute, told Oswald the call could not be completed. End of transmission. Boxley says, why wouldn't they go ahead and set it up and let the agents listen? I haven't the faintest notions. Apparently it had something to do with the woman Sweeney, if the story is correct. What's the source of the information? This Mrs. Troon, who was on the board that night, and later a souvenir picked up the slip of paper that the woman had written on. That's much better than being in the Warren Report. Anyway, is it Sweeney or Swenny? I think it's Sweeney, but I'm not sure. First name was Louise. She was on the switchboard. This much has been checked out. The other woman's name is Troon, and she lives in Springfield, Missouri. We've got an awful lot of calls from Shaw to North Carolina, ostensibly to a boyfriend. I didn't know that. That's right, he took trips there. Of course, that's a beautiful cutout to stick a boyfriend near your agent contact. He took a trip there after being charged to rest. Scambria says, isn't that where Farmy Duval is from? Yeah, that's the boyfriend. I just happen to think he goes to North Carolina. What dates? Oh, after the assassination, but frequently. Of course, he would have continued to operate after the assassination at his level. It would only be the low-level person who would probably get the kicks. Well, an interesting thing about this fellow in Raleigh is that he's on the Secret Service list as those dangerous when either the president or the vice president visited town, because when Humphrey came to Raleigh in March of 1968, the local police were notified to either pick this guy up or keep an eye on him. He's on the nut list. Hurt was? Yeah. Oh, there's a Hurt. She didn't give a phony name. Oh, no. The name and the telephone number match up. The only thing that I can figure is that she had a Raleigh, North Carolina phone book and somehow or other just picked this guy's name out, unless the story is true. But her motive for doing this seems so obscure. When I first heard the story, I thought it was just bullshit. You know, it just sounded like one of those crazy things, but the more I checked out John Hurt, the more interesting he became. And they were threatening to put him in a nut house until about 2 weeks ago, but he's still out at the moment because one of my investigators talked to him by phone last week or the week before, and he was in jail in Louisiana in the fall of 1963 also, in a place called West Carroll. West Carroll, that's a parish. It's way up in the Northeast. There was another phone call he wanted you to check, Bill. What was that? Dallas, the one from California to Dallas, the Oxnard call. Yeah, how the hell are we going to check that? We had both ends of it, didn't we? We got a contact now through some of the Dallas operators who were on at the time. We've never exploited, but it's there. You might try this, Mrs. Louise Sweeney. You could run a check on John Hurt, too. I've got a background on John Hurt as long as your arm. We checked him out because the local police in Raleigh and the state police at the time were investigating him when my man was down there. He sounds like kind of East Coast counter, part of this fellow who disappeared into the woods. You know, the hurt could be if he's got the history of threatening the president, or if Protective Research was interested. He could have been a backup decoy in case the smell of conspiracy got a little strong. Oswald called this guy here. We had another case, either the same one or just like it. Somehow or other, something enters into the case, I don't think. It's a lightning rod, Garrison said. I don't think the story's phony, though, just as I did when I first heard it. I thought it was just pure bullshit. Was he ever in New Orleans? It's quite clear that he was, because his parents lived somewhere in Louisiana. I've forgotten now. I'm in West Carroll, which is right on the way here to Memphis. Redacted, picked up for drinking in. They wouldn't want him to serve this in that case. Who was the man who disappeared in the woods after we sent a subpoena for him? Clint Wheat. He sounds like an East Coast Clint Wheat. Yeah, incidentally, Clint Wheat is supposed to have personal belongings stored in Elite Tourist. Do you want us to try to subpoena them? They're in a moving and storage company there. Are you interested in them? So I think Clint Wheat, what was his name? I've got it. Clint Wheat is short for what his full name is, but Clint Wheat was basically one of these ultra right wingers associated with Lauren Hall and a bunch of these guys, if I'm not mistaken. They may not know where his stuff is stored. They will know it after we subpoena it. I think it's better done indirectly. What I'm saying is the minute it becomes known, they will find a way to go through it, and they will leave garbage. I mean, garbage will be available. Well, I have the name and address of the place where the goods are stored and whatever you can figure out, but it might be well to try to get a crack at it. I feel like right now it would be better not to show any interest in Clint Wheat. Sprague says the Washington State group is working him too. I think I would rather have people working on the guy right now and let them think he's cooled off. I think we will end up with more. They're following him around the state of Washington. Garrison says, incidentally, we feel like there's a chance from what we learned from not from the Washington State inquiry, that F. Lee Chrisman has some kind of connection with a farm in Washington State, and it's possible it's the farm owned by the Army officer, I think. And it's possible that this is the farm that Wheat has gone to. Rose wants to know if you want him to go up there to browse around. Yeah, I thought we agreed that's a good idea. You said you would have him bag the farm. Yeah, then he came. Well, he got involved with Joel Kaplan's sister. That's so remote. I don't know what we can do with that. Boxley says, I'll tell you one thing about that. The Kaplan Fund, as shown in that Newsweek diagram, services more of the other CIA fronts than any other fund. Oh, that's interesting. The Kaplan Fund. Maybe you guys want to check that out. Well, did Joel have anything to do with this whole mishmash? Not that we know of. You know, I told you last night. I know, but you haven't convinced me yet. I haven't convinced myself. The one in prison? Yeah. I think he stumbled across the corner or something. They don't want to kill him because of his relationship to his uncle. Otherwise, they would kill him, but they can't let him loose. Isn't that your evaluation? Yeah, I think so. Guess who brought his name up to me? Robert K. Brown. Jesus Christ. Robert K. Brown said there's the one guy you ought to check carefully. He said is Joel Kaplan. And I said, who the hell is Joel Kaplan? I never heard of him. He's the guy that ordinarily you'd say is pure company because of his activities, but he keeps coming up with things that the company can't be enthusiastic about. I came across an article of his recently, some years ago, which indicated company involvement in a lot of affairs, and I don't think the company would underwrite this. He's the one who gave the statement about Dr. Brennan contacting people. That's why I was asking, Bud, did he volunteer that or was he questioned? I think this guy maybe. He's disgruntled with the company. The company's not treated him well. He's 35 years of age and broke and fighting in Vietnam, and that's not really any great reward for somebody who spent his life trying to help the company. The company is not necessarily generous. When he was at Life, he was working for the company, do you think? Yeah, Brown worked for Billings and Akacha for 8 months. There are men with the company also who have no connections at all with the assassinations, and this sounds like the guy might be in that category. Well, Brown volunteered to come see me. He didn't volunteer. I got in touch with him through a man on the Miami Herald, but I couldn't get in touch with him this directly. He got in touch with me and said, I'm coming through Washington. You talked to him? Yes. Did he tell you why he thought Kaplan was important? No. The only other thing he told me that seemed particularly interesting was a long story about Dennis Harbour, who I've been unable to locate. I think they got the last name wrong here, but I think I know who they're talking about. One of the pilots down in No Name Key. Professor. Yeah, Dennis Harbour, he talked to within the last year. No Name Key. Harbour is terrified, apparently, because Johnny Abbas has returned to the United States. How do you know where Harbour was? He's the executioner in Omaha, or one of those. But where is he now? Everybody's looking for him, and nobody can find him. He's an old man. Is there an indication of why he's fearful of Johnny Abbas? No, he didn't know that either. He just said that he had known Harbour intimately for years, and that Billings wanted Harbour interviewed, and he finally found him, and he went to talk with him. And he would tell him almost nothing that he didn't know. Abbas was executioner for Trujillo, wasn't he? That's right. Trujillo being the head of the Dominican Republic. That's right. But he had showed up again in Miami, and this is apparently he had frightened Harbour to death. That's what he said anyway. Well, the FBI took over the Dominican operations. Now, maybe that's what he said. Trujillo's man is back in town by the end of summer '63. The No Name Key operation was practicing with assassination training. They were no longer training to invade Cuba. The assassination training in Harper. There we go, Harper, Dennis Harper. And their at least purported target was Trujillo, wasn't it? No, Papa Doc. That's right, but that may not have been the real target. Trujillo was supposed to be putting up the money to Masferrer. That's Rolando Masferrer or Kiki Masferrer to get Papa Doc. You had at least 2 points where there was assassination training going on in '63 in the summer. It is north of Lake Pontchartrain, and you had at least one camp, the Lockley group for the Cubans, and apparently another one. And then you had the No Name Key group, and this was assassination training. Again, by November 23rd, there's no more training of any kind. I'm getting the idea that this thing was strictly the work of people who were Batista-oriented. The CIA used Cubans, Bill. They had ended up marrying the Batista Cubans like Bringuier, and they were literally CIA employees, and Arcacha. I think you have to look at Bringuier as a CIA employee who was locked into this thing. You have no more chance of getting the truth from Bringuier about this thing than you have from Clay Shaw. And same thing is true of Arcacha. I think they're part of the structure but the Cubans are just a part of it. But this is part of the CIA anyway. It's a Nazi in its orientation. We just call it CIA, although it may be more than that. But they wouldn't consider using the liberal Cubans like Manolo Rey. They regard him as communist. Swapping the devil for the witch. You see, it says Artini was the only guy who had this whole string of bases through Central America, but I don't think Artini is the right name. That's another one of the audio misinterpretations. This is where Ferrie kept popping up. Swan Island. Well, not Swan Island, but I do mean down in Costa Rica, that camp that they had in Guatemala and Nicaragua. Ferrie is always using this Guatemalan mahogany logging as a cover. Is that Ricardo's? Yeah, that's Ricardo's. I talked to the people it was formed with. Couldn't get the guy to stop talking. There was General Walker, casually, just met him. Told me who introduced him and everything. I think this old man was used more than anything else because he will talk to you at great length about any part of it. The man that Ricardo got set up the Guatemala Hardwood Company. In other words, I think they quite often they will get a guy and have him set something up for them. That may have nothing. The best example is INCA, the Information Council of the Americas. If you look at the names of the board of directors, you'll see 15 of the most distinguished guys in New Orleans, and they don't have the slightest idea why INCA was created. It's being run by Ed Butler, who was an absolute Nazi, who was like Kerry Thornley. They got a bunch of guys at that age that don't seem to really have any need for employment. Speaking of Thornley, is there any way you can think of what we can take that Neely Street photograph, if that's Thornley's body? Of course it is. Of course it is. You see, Garrison and his guys knew so much more back in the day than we seem to know today. It's fucking unbelievable. You mean since Ray Broshears says it is? Well, how did he say that, anyone? Was it just a wild guess? No, you have the specifics, don't you? I think Weisberg got some friend who did a study on that, and they put the two photographs together, the two photographs of an Oswald yard, and it was Weisberg's contention. Did you do that, Dick? No, Fred Newcomb. If you match the heads and the bodies, they don't match. Right. And according to Newcomb and Weisberg, if you line up the heads correctly, there's a 4-inch difference in the body. And the ring is in the right hand, and Oswald always wore his ring on the left hand. Where did Thornley wear his ring? I'll have to talk to Gene. It says Hap, H-A-P, but it's Jeannie Hack again. Furthermore, the cleft in the chin doesn't match at all. The way Brochures came up with that is the way he was shown this. We have the same thing in the office. He was shown this when he came down here. As a result of that, he looked at it and says, I can see right now that it's Thornley's body and Oswald's head. Exactly. Fucking exactly. Exactly. I love it when I'm fucking vindicated. Of course, it was Thornley and Marina in on the setup. Same in Alice, Texas. He went to Mexico City. He shot Tippett. Motherfucker. God, I love being right. And so we said, well, how can you be sure? He said, well, I had sex with Thornley, and I know his slender hips. He said his hips were more slender than Oswald, and also these are Thornley's hands, and he describes the hands. Does Thornley wear a ring on his left hand? Didn't have the occasion to look. A ring like that one, it's a very distinctive-looking ring. That's logical as hell, I tell you. But if you look at the other pictures of Oswald under arrest, you'll notice where it starts to show that part of the hand with the ring has been cut off. Well, there's some of Murray's photos, which they couldn't edit because they got to Glass Star before they had a chance. There's a ring in every one of them on his left hand. That's interesting. You can't find the ring in the Warren pictures. It's been cut off. That's because they had the picture. They couldn't afford a lack of a match on the ring. Jim, have you reached any conclusions on Nigel? I spent about 3 hours with him in Central Park, talking to him at some length, and about 6 hours in a hotel lobby the next day, and I think he is absolutely genuine. Who is he and what is he? Said Fensterwald. He's so elliptical. I think he's a KGB man. Well, I think he was initially a U.S. intelligence officer in the Army, who at some point in his career, probably in Asia, married the Soviet apparatus. I think for idealistic reasons from his viewpoint, and in the course of his time became a CIA operator. And he was, his account is that he was sent by CIA, he doesn't specify the mission, but on business to see what was happening with the group around Oswald. Oswald and Sergei Arkacha and others he won't go into. One of a few things he was specific about. Did he mention Sergei Arkacha? He did. Tied in with Oswald. Yeah, but again in a vague way, very elliptical. He was concerned about his life. All right, so let me just clarify again. The only people I can say I'm pretty confident that our Oswald had contact with in New Orleans was Clay Shaw and Kerry Thornley. That's it. I believe he was kept at arm's length. You're not going to fucking let your patsy hang out while you're setting them up. Give me a fucking break. Like so many of the official conspiracy theory stories about Oswald hanging out with these fucking guys is just so blatantly wrong if you ask me. Because you're not going to, like, it's just like at the book depository. How the fuck are you going to have Oswald working at the book depository, freely wandering around the building, not involved in this because he's the fucking patsy, and then you're going to smuggle 3 assassins in the building while the patsy's just wandering around? Give me a fucking break. Oswald was kept in the dark about virtually everything and kept at arm's length. So all this was going on behind his back that he didn't even know, if you ask me. So when they talk about these guys interacting with Oswald, I believe the person they were interacting with was Kerry Thornley. The whole time. The whole time. Yeah, but in a vague way, very elliptical. He was concerned about his life. He was sent to Mexico for this. He would say whether it happened in Mexico or Texas, he was concerned about his life when I talked to him and concerned about being able to get out of the country. It was obvious that he had made contact with the Russians and they were going to try to get him out of the country. Who were the 3 guys who met him at the airport when he arrived? Federal agents. Federal agents told him not to talk to anybody. CIA or FBI or what? He wouldn't specify. The federal government. Where, in New York? Yeah. But you say he was a double agent beginning sometime in the 50s. Yeah, in the late 50s. Was he sent to Mexico? He wouldn't say Mexico or Texas. But he was sent to check on Oswald, Arkacha, and the others. Well, it wasn't to check on Oswald because Oswald is also an employee of the CIA. But his assignment was to see what this structure was doing, and Oswald was a part of the structure. The way he described it in one of his few specific moments was that initially the assassination plan was scheduled for Washington. From the way they talked, and Oswald apparently had some decoy assignment, but didn't seem concerned at all about the danger to himself. Nagel said that he immediately felt Oswald had no chance of surviving such a situation, and in any effect, and in so many words, I think somebody's setting you up. Why aren't you concerned? Oswald seemed to feel that he was covered for reasons he did not explain. When I asked him if it was consistent with his reaction if Oswald felt that he was working for the federal government and had been assigned to infiltrate such an operation, and he said that he would be one way of explaining his attitude because he seemed to feel that he was completely protected. In other words, Oswald was the only one he described as completely CIA and had no worries at all about himself. Why did Nagel do what he did in Texas and El Paso? He explained that this way. He wrote that he got the impression as the time went on that there was no interest in his contacts in the federal government in stopping the affair, and he wrote the head of the FBI a special delivery letter giving him some details about the plan to assassinate the president, and that he had come across when he didn't get any reply and had no interest shown, and the thing seems to be continuing. He realized that this was not his words, but the ultimate impression that the government itself was back of it. You mean he told his own superiors in the CIA? He didn't indicate that. I should have asked him. Did you get the impression he was with the KGB at the time also? Yes. And did he mention something called the XYZ Company? That sounds familiar to me from some earlier questioning when he was at Bravo Club. We just have that from the earlier questioning. What I did, I spent most of my time trying to get him to be more specific about the CIA and Oswald, and I finally got him to be specific about the fact that Oswald was an employee of the CIA. And he said, as a matter of fact, I knew Oswald not only in Mexico and Texas, but in Atsugi too, where training Nagel did. Yeah, that could easily have been. He said, I was at Atsugi at the time, and so there's no question about him being in the CIA. But what he did without using these exact words, the picture that he portrayed again and again, was that he found himself in the position where nobody above him and no part of the governmental structure he had contact with was interested in stopping what was happening. It's like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, where you're running from this guy and you finally get to the house and you open it and there's the guy you're running from. That was Nagel's situation. And he said he didn't expect to get the time he got. He thought he would, when they fired the gun in the bank, that he would ensure that this would be in a federal institution of some sort when it happened, because it was now inevitable, but just assumed it would be 6 months or something like that. Of course, the machinery got a hold of him and they made it 10 years. The judge was Thornberry. Thornberry, did he mention, really? Yeah, did he mention a man named Greenstein in Wilmington, Delaware? But Greenstein is a contact of Bill's, that he didn't mention him. He didn't mention him? No. Did he mention seeing Oswald in Mexico City in 62 or 63? Yes, I think he mentioned seeing Oswald in Mexico City, and he said something about a woman being with him. That figures. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call it right here for today. Very interesting stuff. For me, the most interesting stuff of all this is the John Hurt stuff. John Hurt and his parents lived in Louisiana, and so he was down there, and he got arrested down there in the fall of 63. That's pretty fucking wild. That's pretty wild. I'm going to have to do some digging into John Hurt. The man who understands all that stuff is Ryan Dawson, but he's not going to talk about it ever. So Ryan, John Hurt was a cutout. The cutout is supposed to call the real contact, right? Ryan knows who that real contact is because Ryan knew that real contact's son, who happened to work for Ryan's father's company, right? And they just connected that way. So he's the only person on the planet who understands that story. And will he ever tell you? Nope. But ask him about it. If a million people shoot him an email about it, he's going to have to acknowledge that he knows about it and then spill the beans. But that guy, that contact, according to Ryan, knew a whole lot more about the assassination than he should have. So, but that's going to do it for me today, guys. I will be back next time, and thanks for chiming in.